Welcome to the March 5th, 2025 meeting of the Council Policies and Procedures Committee. This meeting is being conducted with a virtual component, so anyone wishing to address the committee virtually may join the meeting online or by dialing 669-900-9128. I believe the Zoom link is in the agenda, which is posted online. And the webinar ID is 847-5493-3805. When the chair announces the item on which you wish to speak, click the raise hand button feature in Zoom or dial *9 on your phone. When the chair calls your name to provide public comment, if you're participating via phone, please press *6. Mute yourself. Any emails received by 8 a.m. today were forwarded to the CPDC. Emails received after 8 a.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Recently, regional and local elected and appointed bodies have been subjected to disruptive racist verbal attacks by anonymous callers during virtual public comments. The City of Mountain View is fully committed to racial, religious, and cultural equity and justice as we strive to create a welcoming, safe, and inclusive community for all. This advisory body commission welcomes respectful and non-threatening public comments regarding matters over which the advisory body or commission has jurisdiction. Comments deemed otherwise pursuant to Council Code of Conduct and the Government Code may be grounds for immediately terminating a speaker's comment period. And we'll start with Ms. Thomas with our.
Great. Councilmember Ramirez.
Here.
Chair Clark.
I'm here.
And Councilmember McAllister is absent.
So item 3 is minutes approval of the CPPC minutes from November 20th, 2024 are in the packet. Does anyone have any comments or questions regarding the minutes? No. There's none. Is there any public comment on the minutes? Any? So a motion would be in order to read the minutes. So moved. And I'll second that. So we'll do a.
Yes. Chair Clark.
Aye.
And Councilmember Ramirez.
Yes.
Councilmember McAllister absent.
So that passes 2 yes, 1 absent. Item 4 is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter that is not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes. During this section, state law prohibits the CPPC from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on any item that is not on the agenda? If so, please submit a blue card or the raise hand button or dial *9 on your phone. So we'll close item 4 and move on to our discussion and action items. Item 5.1 is the new council policy gatekeeper authorization process, and we will have a presentation by our Director of Community Development, Christian Murdoch.
Good afternoon, council members, staff. Christian Murdoch, Community Development Director. I'm joined by my 2 Assistant Community Development Directors, Lindsay Hagan and Bert Lozinski, here today to talk about a new City Council policy to describe the city's gatekeeper authorization procedure. Just for some brief background, the council put in place a gatekeeper process in 2001 as a mechanism to manage staff resources in light of a significant number of applications requesting legislative amendments to zoning or general plan standards, and amended that policy in 2012 to require all of these applications to be reviewed by the Environmental Planning Commission. And then again in 2017 and 18 to clarify various requirements, procedures, criteria, and introducing gatekeeper exemptions. And to define what a gatekeeper application is, essentially it's a project that requires a legislative amendment, such as a rezoning or general plan amendment or zoning text change. That's a legislative action as compared to an adjudicative action, such as a permit action to approve or conditionally approve a project. More recently, in June of 2023, the City Council put on its fiscal years 2023 through 2025 Council Work Plan, a Category A priority project to update the city's gatekeeper procedures and policy. Carrying forward from that, city council prioritization in September 2023 and December of 2023, council held study sessions on the gatekeeper policy update. And among a number of other items that are detailed in the staff report, some key examples of majority council support included adding objective criteria to the application process, maintaining a streamlined approach for 100% affordable projects, and adopting community design principles that would guide applicants in preparing their gatekeeper applications. In January of 2024, council directed staff to use the existing gatekeeper criteria for the 2024 gatekeeper application process, which the city was required to hold pursuant to housing element obligations. And then in September 2024, council held a gatekeeper authorization hearing and authorized 2 applications to proceed to the formal application process. It's important to keep in mind as council considers an update to the gatekeeper policy that the city has obligations under the housing element, specifically in program 1.3 related to the gatekeeper policy. The housing element obligations are intended to ensure that the gatekeeper process is not a hindrance to housing development, housing approval and development. And so ensuring that in program 1.3F that the city identifies gatekeeper exemptions for residential projects based on location, size, affordability, and other policy goals. And then in 1.3.g, ensuring that the city holds at least 1 gatekeeper authorization hearing per year, which it may limit to residential or residential mixed-use projects, but ensuring that greater opportunities are there for project-specific rezonings through the gatekeeper process. And as noted, the city had an obligation under milestones and timeframe to hold at least 1 gatekeeper authorization in 2024, which council did, and then to hold at least 1 on residential projects each year. So as we think about what an update to the gatekeeper policy would include, there are a few key pieces here. Carrying forward council's direction to formalize the process and to adopt written procedures to provide clarity to applicants in this process. Recognizing zoning text amendments are needed, which would involve environmental planning commission consideration before bringing ordinance to city council as part of this update process. Those zoning text amendments are related to the gatekeeper exemptions, which are currently in city code sections related to general plan amendments and zoning amendments. And then putting together a council policy, a draft of which is attached to the CPP's staff report for this item, to bring it all together and formalize the procedures, criteria, certain processing components to set those expectations clearly for council, staff, and the public. So before jumping into some of the specifics of the proposed gatekeeper policy for the CPP's consideration today, I just want to clarify a couple key terms as we talk about the process and some of the substantive components. The first is standard gatekeeper or gatekeeper application. As noted earlier, it's a project that requires a legislative amendment such as a rezoning or general plan amendment, and it must go to a council authorization hearing before submitting a formal application to the Community Development Department to be processed and to commit significant staff resources. And the other type of gatekeeper we've defined as a streamlined gatekeeper application. And that's a project type that does not require a council authorization hearing because it meets certain criteria that have been defined. Essentially, it's an incentive to have those kinds of applications be submitted to forego the council authorization hearing process, which can result in delays. And so it's a streamlined approach. Sometimes those have been called gatekeeper exempt or exempt gatekeeper applications, which we don't think is the best terminology, given they're still subject to city council approval or denial through the legislative process, but they are on a streamlined process by bypassing the authorization hearing. The figure on the screen shows the 4 main steps in the gatekeeper process: application process, the evaluation phase, the council authorization hearing process, and then those that advance and are authorized moving on to the review process through the formal application review process. The gatekeeper policy update is really focusing on the 2 components that are outlined in red in the figure, the streamlined gatekeeper definitions or criteria, and then the application criteria and design principles, which are used in the initial evaluation process that are brought forward to the council authorization process. You can see below each of the steps as well some green text. This is just highlighting some of the key provisions in the proposed updated policy that pertain to each of these phases. So notably, there would be an ongoing application period in the policy the staff's put forward for consideration. So folks could have applied any time during the year. but would need to apply at least 90 days prior to a scheduled authorization hearing to ensure sufficient time for staff to evaluate and prepare the materials for the authorization hearing. And then you'll see in the third block there, holding at least one authorization hearing per year for residential projects, as I noted earlier. And then in the final stage there, ensuring applicants submit their formal application with 1 year of council authorization, and then ensuring that they go through study sessions at EPC Council to more fully develop those gatekeeper authorizations into the formal application stage. Interesting. So shifting now to the proposed streamlined gatekeeper exemptions. Those were a subject of council discussion at the prior study sessions. Currently, there are 3 exemption categories for certain split zone sites, industrial to residential conversion, or ITR as they're sometimes called, and then 100% affordable housing projects. In the prior study sessions, the council majority did recommend removing the split zone and industrial to conversion, residential conversion exemptions, and then recommended keeping the 100% affordable housing exemption, subject to some changes to allow any 100% affordable project minus managers units to move forward as a streamlined gatekeeper without requiring it to be part of the city's notice of funding availability or NOFA committee process. After analyzing the council's prior direction and reconciling it against our housing element obligations, we didn't feel like we could put forward a recommendation to eliminate the split zone and ITR exemptions, but we did add language, which you see on the slide here in bold text, to add additional qualifying criteria that would allow them to apply to certain projects, including residential development, that would have the greatest likelihood of advancing affordable housing. And specifically, it's the 30 dwelling unit per acre minimum density that would need to be proposed. That under state law is the minimum density where the city can presume affordability as being feasible for those development types. So the criteria that have been added would narrow those somewhat in terms of the split zone and ITR categories to achieve those housing element objectives related to encouraging and allowing more streamlined processes for housing approvals. Regarding the application criteria, there were sort of 3 key categories that council discussed, and we'll turn to them each in more detail in a moment. The first is use. And so there were concerns during the council discussion at the study sessions about spot zoning. That's not exactly the right term, I think, used to address or describe the council's concerns, but I think we interpret as staff, the concern was introducing a unique land use in an area that didn't have that land use before or similar land uses, and providing some sort of inconsistency, if you will, with the general framework of the city's planning documents. And so what we've tried to do is define a criteria that would be used to determine if the use that's proposed in the gatekeeper application is generally a use that would be allowable in the area within a half-mile radius. So we're not introducing pockets of commercial use in significantly residential areas or vice versa, residential uses in significantly commercial areas through the gatekeeper process. The next included a range of public benefits that the council thought high-quality gatekeeper applications would contain, as well as community design principles that would be included and incorporated in those proposed projects. Important to note that our interpretation of the council's direction was not to make these requirements for a gatekeeper application, but factors that applicants should be aware of, that they should strive to maximize, incorporating the greatest number and to the greatest extent to make these attractive applications for the council to want to consider for gatekeeper authorization. In terms of public benefits, the council identified a number of categories that it felt would be reflective of projects that would be valuable and of interest to the community across a range of topics such as affordable housing, business retention, including public open space, including community facilities, providing key transportation infrastructure or programs that exceed the city's transportation demand management or TDM requirements. And then the last line there, you'll see providing a different outlet for smaller projects to pay essentially a per square foot fee because they may not have as many options to include those design components in the projects given their small scale. And then related to community design principles, council wanting these projects to be considered high quality or well-designed to include trees and biodiversity objectives, minimum 75% native trees and landscaping, and dark sky measures as an example. Historic preservation, finding ways either on-site directly with the project or off-site, perhaps through financial support to facilitate the preservation of historic resources for public enjoyment. Active transportation, incorporating a variety of complete streets and multimodal transportation components, wider sidewalks, and focusing on key linkages to public facilities such as parks and schools. And then sustainability principles to advance net zero carbon emissions that you're building site design. And then to round out a variety of other subjects, the proposed policy includes definitions to provide clarity to applicants, provisions related to application timing, the frequency of authorization hearings, which includes the discretion of the city manager to recommend perhaps more than one authorization hearing if it was needed to efficiently consider gatekeeper applications, either by residential and non-residential categories or large and small projects separately, however would be most efficient. Public notification criteria, the content of staff analysis and staff reports so that there's some uniformity across evaluating gatekeeper applications. Again, requiring study sessions at EPC and council. Reapplication timing components to come back within a 2-year period if an application is not authorized to move forward, so that we're not just seeing these same applications on a recurrent basis if the council did not authorize them. And then lastly, if something substantive changes either in the project components or project ownership for an authorized gatekeeper application, they would need to come back and seek reauthorization to ensure that those changes continue to meet the council's intent. And so staff has put forward in attachment 1 a draft policy that we would ask the CPPC to consider and to recommend to the city council that would be brought forward at a future council date. Our goal is to try to bring this forward before the summer recess so that we can then put out the public notification and begin to solicit gatekeeper applications. I do want to acknowledge, just given this is a unique year where we're trying to put in place a new policy, it's possible that the authorization hearing could occur after this calendar year, but as early as possible in calendar year 2026, just given the timing of when we would announce the new policy and the application opportunity. And the last thing we would ask for from the CPPC is an indication if you have a thought about how we would bring this forward to council, either on consent calendar or as a new business item. In your judgment, is how we would most effectively accomplish consideration of this. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we do public comment, I'll any questions.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple. First, to clarify the use criteria, this wouldn't apply, or would it apply to a hypothetical project that included a mixed use component? So for instance, maybe there isn't, I can't imagine there are large areas of the city where this would apply unless we're talking about Waverly Park and including some industrial use or something, which is not likely. But if there were to be a mixed use component, like ground floor retail or a coffee shop or something, could this use criterion end up including the possibility of including that commercial element?
I think as we've envisioned this, at least, one of the project components that's proposed with the gatekeeper application would need to be already allowed within that half-mile radius. This particular component probably could benefit from additional clarification to be sure as to what is and is not allowed, or at least what's favored or disfavored, since these are not required components of an application. So CPPC recommended close alignment with existing land use, or any one of the proposed could be anywhere within the half mile or a quarter mile. Those would be good clarifications in the policy to take forward to council.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then we talked, so thank you first of all for giving me some time to understand what the staff proposal was in advance of the meeting. In that phone call, you had confirmed that gatekeepers will continue to require a development permit in addition to the discretionary legislative change that's sought, right? Is that in the Muni code? Like, I actually don't know where that requirement lives. It's not in the policy.
Understood.
Yeah, so I think it's, looking at the project and what that would entail, that's where you have those requirements in the Muni code. So you'd be looking at these legislative changes and what that entails, but then also I think you're talking about the project's actual development permits.
So is there anything that prohibits me from just submitting a change to the color on the map?
Oh, no, I don't think so. No.
Okay, but is that something that we would want to confirm or to affirm that what? Would staff recommend to continue to allow the possibility for just changes to colors of the map without a corresponding project?
Because the policy is set up right now for CPP's consideration, it does not require, full details. I think those are implied and indicated to be important because that's how you would demonstrate the proposed project fulfills the various criteria that are desired. We could be more explicit if that would be helpful. I don't have a sense of whether you're suggesting that policy should or should not allow, just a change to the map without any project details. I think that would limit the information the council receives, but on the other hand, to be fair, and we've recognized throughout, post authorization and post approval gatekeeper situations that sometimes those projects change and really council should be thinking about the legislative changes and whether those are desirable because they may or may not ultimately be associated with a particular project, the way that this process is structured currently.
Historically, gatekeeper applications tend to include a project. There may have been examples of just changes to colors in the map. Lindsay probably knows better than I do, but those are infrequent. And it's not something, even though we strongly imply that we want to see a corresponding project, the process itself doesn't prohibit or preclude the possibility of an applicant from just seeking a GPA or rezoning.
Yeah, and I think that you'd want to continue to allow that just in case there's some scenario we aren't thinking of where they have, I'm just thinking outside the box where really all they needed was like a text change or really all they needed was, component changed that didn't necessarily have to be relayed with the project. So I just would think you probably do want to continue that because this is that platform for those legislative changes. And I think that then it's a true decision on whether or not that's a appropriate change for that site, right?
I would just add to it that where we have seen scenarios play out like that, it's actually been more packaged as part of staff moving forward with staff-based amendments that we encompass things here and there that may benefit other private properties because we've had those conversations. So we haven't necessarily had a lot of standalone gatekeepers where they're just coming forward to do a color change, but yeah, I think to everyone's point, it's an option. I think we'd have to be clear if that is the path that CPC recommends is just being clear how the criteria might work in the scenario.
And this would also apply to text modification. So the zoning may stay the same, but maybe a development standard changes. And that's the only thing I'm submitting through the gatekeeper process. The process would not preclude that.
That's right. And that would be a good example of where the city manager may recommend, hey, let's batch text changes, right? These are maybe more minor, they can be more efficiently considered and move forward as a package as opposed to major development projects, right? That are the more traditional gatekeeper that you want to authorize or not authorize based on significant staff resource impacts.
Okay, thank you. And then also just being very clear, even with the submission of a formal application that's deemed complete, the Permit Streamlining Act would not apply. Don't have the chess clock.
Correct.
Wow, okay. So in that, when you have applications that are complete, what is there like for customer service, right? Is there an amount of time that we try to get back to the applicant? I mean, what's that time frame typically?
Yeah, I think we strive as much as possible to respond in a 30-day tempo,
We
right?
still use the same.
It's a guideline,
Yeah,
not
okay.
a requirement in these
Gotcha.
instances. I think the challenge is, and it's sort of underlying fundamental purpose of the gatekeeper process, which is that we don't want to have more applications than we can efficiently and timely process. And so it's sort of a self-reinforcing mechanism that if we want to be timely and provide that good service and strive for a 30 or 45-day review tempo, that we should have a appropriate number of projects, including gatekeeper authorizations that are being reviewed at a given time.
Okay.
I think I should add, though, I don't want to say that we're hitting the 30-day mark, though, on those. I would guess 45 is probably more practical. But, you know, my staff members are looking to get these projects moved along as well.
30 to 45 days, but not 6 months, right? So
Correct.
you're aiming for sort of
Correct.
ballpark, same order of magnitude as with a PSA protected project.
Mhm.
And what I would just add to that is we do follow the same review process. So it's reviewed by the same different city departments. It goes through our same routing process. So in many ways, it has the same experience as any other project. And I would just remind CC members that we are one of the only cities that really are performing in this way with these type of requests and projects. A lot of cities just sort of let these projects stall out, sort of sit aside. There's very few cities that really process these in a timely way. So I think, as mentioned here, we do a lot of volume of them compared to other cities. So I think we're still doing our best in terms.
And we in the Muni code, there is an expiration date, right? If the applicant doesn't get back within some time frame, the gatekeeper application request expires entirely. And then you start from scratch. Is that right?
So there's two different timelines. One is if you don't submit your formal application within a year or within a year from the date you were told, then it's considered expired. And then we have a separate timeline that we added actually only a couple years ago to our code about stalled applications in general. So if somebody doesn't resubmit in a timely fashion, no matter if they're a gatekeeper or not, then we can close out their permit.
What is timely fashion?
90 days.
90 days. Wow, that's very quick. Okay. Those are my questions for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. For the streamline gatekeeper, just looking at the flow chart. It sort of basically is exempt in that initial hearing. So there's a final, it's like at the end, there's no council authorization until the end. So is there, but then there were study sessions mentioned elsewhere. So I'm just curious how they get feedback along the way if they don't want to end up in a world where they finally make it to council and council throws up all over it. Do they just have informal meetings, or maybe there's an EPC checkpoint? I don't know, but for the streamlined ones specifically.
Right, I think the study session is still a valuable mechanism for input along the way, as early as possible to help shape the project concept and not get the adverse feedback much later in the process. But that is a risk that those applications may not sort of get the very early read from the council through the authorization process. And that's the trade-off where you're setting conditions and criteria where that project would bypass the authorization hearing to then move forward to the processing. So you would just be replacing one process for another if there was a desire to have something much earlier, let's say, time of application.
And then for the proposed streamlined gatekeeper exemptions, I know the council had previously, you mentioned eliminating split zone and industrial residential conversion, I think. And then you refine the criteria in response to that, not eliminate it, but I mean, would you, in a perfect world, since the council's changed a little bit, I mean, do you prefer keeping these additional criteria, or would you prefer that these were just eliminated and we just allowed all three of these categories to go?
I think the interesting question right, is what kind of projects does the council want to incentivize? And I think there's seems to be strong support from the council to incentivize, high quality housing projects and typically higher density. We've heard council interest in middle ownership opportunities. And so it could be a way to craft these differently to incentivize narrow set of projects that council wants to be able to move forward expediently to the application process without an authorization. I think one of the interesting components here is the initial categories that a project must first qualify in to then also have the additional criteria of density, let's say here, or a 2-acre site size. If the idea is to incentivize those project types, maybe that first filter isn't necessary. And we're really just defining a project type that is exempt. We have not done, the analysis to go beyond that. It could potentially significantly increase the number of gatekeeper exempt projects, which is one downside to that method. But if it's in furtherance of high council priority projects, that may be something we need to figure out how to resource and then what the other trade-offs might be. Ultimately, right, they're not subject to permit streamlining processing, and so it would be a workload calculation if there are other competing priorities as well.
I think too, just, under the existing gatekeeper exemptions, what we're seeing right now, we have 3. They're all row house developments. And they wouldn't meet the, as we've written these newer or updated versions. So you would then hope you would get a higher density product. Not that it's wrong or bad, it's just, it's not quite at that density level where you're gonna get, the good, the better affordable mix and housing. And, those projects we're working on them being complete so that they, don't fall under, if we do make modifications, they're not impacted by that because they were submitted in time, right? But that's the 3 that we've seen now without these additional tweaks to the language.
It's not clear if those are the project types council's trying to incentivize.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, I think we'll just have to learn along the way, because the types of gatekeepers we received over the years, so just, they change with market conditions. And then, so the community design principles and all of those things are, if you call out the presentation, they're not required, they're just kind of, here's what might help your application sort of thing.
Thank you for things that we kept hearing from council frequently. And the projects that were coming forward for council consideration, not gatekeeper projects, or just projects that do the same things that kept coming up that were important to council.
I get it. So the only other question I had was on the reauthorization requirement. So I think you mentioned a 2-year period. If there's a denial, wait 2 years, which makes sense. But I'm thinking about a scenario where maybe you have a 4-3 vote, or it's pretty clear if there were, if a single substantial change were made, that the council might be willing to reconsider it. I guess they could say I guess the council could say at the hearing that you're authorizing you to come back sooner than 2 years in that scenario.
Change this one thing and come back.
Yeah, it would be a significant thing, I would guess, but I just wouldn't want to preclude them. You force them to wait if they're really truly responding to it. I guess the council can.
We could add language, unless a different time frame is specified, shorter time frame is specified.
I think that's all my questions. Any other? So I don't see any members of the public here wishing to comment in person. I don't think we have anyone on Zoom. Okay. So we'll close public comments and move on to any feedback. That we want.
I have a lot to say. So first, I appreciate staff's work in reviewing, 3 different meetings where we talked about this in 2023 and early 2024. Those were challenging meetings. I think there were, a lot of, different, perspectives, not easily synthesized. And I think I would say, in part, it's challenging because few of us on the council are technical experts, in land use. I think there's,
We are.
sorry?
I think we are.
I'll give
We're
Allison
used to
some
be.
credit as someone who actually has worked in this profession. I have pretty strong opinions about this. I think in an ideal world, we would invert a process where to allow projects to be submitted with some general guidelines for staff to evaluate. And if those guidelines were not met, then staff could come to the council in a process where you would say, based on some of the characteristics or goals that the council has established, these projects don't have merit, and so you would be directed essentially to cease evaluating those applications. I think it gives the applicant an opportunity to make a case to the council. I know I don't achieve any of your goals, but here's why my project has merit. The problem I have with the gatekeeper process is that it has become arbitrary and capricious and political. It doesn't actually achieve the stated goal, which is to appropriately meter out staff capacity. If that weren't the case, we probably wouldn't have approved the 2 gatekeepers that went to us last year. I don't think staff capacity is actually a metric that the council understands or really uses or evaluates appropriately when evaluating these projects. If we actually wanted that, then I think what we should do is direct staff to come up with some evaluation tool where you can say, this project, has very little impact on capacity, so we can absorb it, and process it based on, again, some stated criteria, right? It achieves these goals, it's within the capacity to, for the staff to work on, so it moves through. Here are projects that have considerable impacts, right? So even though it may achieve some council goals, it has significant impact and would impede staff's ability to achieve higher priority projects in the workload. That's what I think would be a better way of achieving the goal that I think the gatekeeper process is intended to achieve. This is the worst of all worlds, I think, where it doesn't really matter what the staff capacity impact is, it's how much we like the applicant. I would love to explore a different approach. Ideally, the first approach I was describing, where he would give you some hopefully clear objective criteria where staff would be able to say, this application meets the criteria. You're not subject to the Permit Streamlining Act, so you're not going to get that the preferential treatment that folks who have a legal protection would get. But we're going to process it because it helps achieve the goals that were stated in policy by the council. It doesn't achieve those things, or maybe there's an override. Like this is such an impactful project. We really can't include it in the work plan. You go to council and you say, you have to make some trade-offs, council. If you wanted to do this, you've got to cut something else from your work. If that's not possible for whatever reason, that aren't the votes, then the next best thing is what I think the community development director was describing in response to your question, Chair. That we amend the streamlined gatekeeper categories or introduce different criteria to ensure that the projects that bypass the authorization stage actually achieve council's goals. Some of these may have made sense a long time ago, but we have precious little blue on our zoning map, right? I don't think the council actually is interested in facilitating the erosion of our industrial base for row houses. Don't believe that that's the council's goal. So that second category doesn't make sense to me, which is why I voted to eliminate that category. There are very few split zone properties, right? That was created because the council wanted to help one applicant many years ago who now has a builder's remedy application before us, right? That category, these are the the wrong categories to achieve council's goals. The better categories would have some, I forgot, you had an elegant term in our phone call, but some performance metric or there's some outcome associated. What is it that you want to achieve? Is it the creation of new parks or affordable housing or mixed use development or, you know, whatever the case may be, right? That's what would be spelled out in this policy. Because these projects achieve those goals, they meet all of the objective criteria, staff goes through the checklist, they would be exempt from the authorization hearing, which de-risks the project. It makes it more likely that a developer or an applicant would actually want to submit a project that helps achieve our goals. The authorization process is risky. It's expensive. You have to go through 7 challenging personalities, right? And then even if you do, get permission to submit an application, there's no guarantee that the council at the end of the line, right, 4 years later, is going to approve that project. It's an extremely risky process. It's designed to discourage creativity. I think it pushes developers to code compliant projects that also don't achieve our goals, right? Because we have limited discretion on code compliant projects. We tend not to get nice things from them. And now the state has made it almost impossible to get nice things from those kinds of projects. So the gatekeepers, right, the projects that have a discretionary legislative action associated with them give us an opportunity to get a little bit more. But I think we have to meet these applicants halfway by saying, in exchange for de-risking and depoliticizing the process, exempting or streamlining, right, by not having to go through that inaugural permission to submit an application process, you have to meet some objective performance criteria, performance-based criteria. So that's very poorly articulated, but that's sort of the way I would like to approach this. What is it that we want? How do we facilitate? How do we create a process that helps the council get what we're looking for, creating clarity for both staff and the applicant, and also for the community, and not end up the process that either discourages creativity and pushes folks to just complying with what we have here in our regulatory framework, or worse, right? You end up with strange projects that staff may feel has no merit, but because that applicant has taken the time to count to 4, right? And now you have to work on a project that is very difficult because the project parameters really weren't aligned with what the council has been telling you that they want. So I can't support what staff has proposed. I do believe it is a good faith effort to align with the council direction from a couple of years ago, but I don't think it actually helps achieve our goals. I think it creates barriers to entry where I don't believe that's what the council's really trying to achieve. And I think there's an opportunity for some revisions that help us meet our housing obligations and also get projects that actually do something for the community.
Specific proposal.
And so I was gonna say, so that would be the first thing. And the second is, just to speak to the capacity issue. So I think for 3 years, I think it was, we didn't even have gatekeepers. Yeah, 3-4 years because of staff capacity during the pandemic. And the outcry about not doing them was far greater than the city or staff saying, we just can't get to them. I mean, look at our work plan. We can't even finish things on our work plan. We're not even finish half of the things on our work plan. And we have, these 145 projects that have been submitted that are outside of the gatekeeper process. So I think it would be objectively very difficult to put some sort of standard or barometer on just at least the staff capacity issue, because fundamentally, the answer is probably we don't have capacity to do gatekeepers, but we need to because it's in the housing element and because a lot of the projects, as you mentioned, might be very desirable to council. But in the last gatekeeper hearing last year, staff did present trade-offs and council wasn't interested in it. So I think we just would want to be very specific and careful about how we would even introduce this concept of staff capacity into the process. But if if what you're really, getting at is the some objective criteria in the outset of these are the type of projects we want to see. That's what I'm hearing is almost like providing examples of these are the sort of desirable projects that the city of Mountain View is looking for. Does it do this? And that's what I'm hearing as far as the metrics. Does it provide additional park space? Does it provide X, number of housing units? Is it missing middle housing or certain things that the council is very clearly interested in seeing? I think that we could, maybe it's a living policy to where it is updated based on council's desires and interests at that time or what we're seeing in the community. And we bake those in. But I think if we are to come back, and correct me if I'm wrong, and totally rebake the whole thing, it's gonna set this process back a little bit further. But maybe just starting out with some of the objective criteria could be a way to at least provide some guidance.
Right, I think,
applicants.
if we were to come back to CPPC again, sometime in March, I think we could keep our desired process on track.
This month in March?
Yes, I think that's the only opportunity we would have to
For this coming
keep
gatekeeper.
this current gatekeeper process on track with a new set of policies.
Is staff actually hearing interest from applicants?
Other than the three you said you've,
Well, they're already
Yeah.
through. They're
yeah.
already through.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, but I didn't ask that,
Yeah.
I didn't ask everyone.
Has council? I haven't heard any, but I haven't heard any
I think
interest.
the market is not good right now.
I think that's the reality.
The other piece I wanted to offer in response to your remarks, Councilmember Ramirez, is maybe this set of application criteria and design principles is a menu you may want to start from to say, maybe if it has 3 out of these at minimum, it could be a streamlined gatekeeper application. Because these are, as the city manager noted, the recurring themes of highly desirable projects.
So through the chair, I don't want to dominate the time, but I suck up a lot of box. So that's exactly what I would suggest, right? In the study sessions, I think I memory serves, or at least in the ACT group I was a part of, I was pretty clear. I care more about the process than I do the specific criteria, right? It's whatever a majority of the council wants. If these sound fine, all of these things are good, I guess I am objecting very strongly to how I've seen the process play out in my observation of the council since 2013. I don't think the gatekeeper process works, and I don't think it achieves outcomes that we actually are trying to articulate. This menu, so in other words, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what basically, right, we have some objective criteria associated with these categories, and the council, affirms this, then what staff would do is say, they would look at a project and say, okay, you meet the criteria associated with these category, with each category, so you are streamlined. You don't have to go through that step of seeking permission from the council to submit an application. Doesn't mean your project is approved by any means. There's still extensive review, there's still CEQA, right? It's a very lengthy project, but you don't have to go through that highly politicized, arbitrary, capricious authorization hearing where crazy things happen and none of us, I think, come in with a coherent sense of what we actually want to achieve.
Yeah, I think I'm offering that as a response to the concerns you identified about a lack of clarity and the politicization and the maybe lack of focus on what was initially the core basis for this, which was staff capacity. If the desire is to incentivize certain project outcomes, then I think that's a sensible way to do it. Trying to make them as objective as possible, like transportation, exceeding the requirements in the DDM ordinance, that's very difficult for staff to assess as part of a streamlined.
This would have to be, you're right.
Nuance.
Affordable housing has some objective criteria, public open space does as 2 examples, and so we can pick from this or build on this list or create new criteria, depending on what the CPPC wants to do.
So I think there are many different paths to victory. In other words, what I could not support though is anything that takes the existing process and makes it worse, in my opinion. I'm eager to hear your thoughts, Chair.
All right, can I just clarify? So, using this menu approach and refining the criteria, it would then convert what staff has presented here as suggested criteria into required. Have to be some combination
yes.
or whatever it ends up being, they
For the
become
exemption.
required, yeah.
Right, so because staff would need something to compare an application against, right?
Correct.
If it's subjective, then how do you know,
Right.
right? Like whether the council would like to see this project.
Right.
So that's why we have to be very thoughtful up front in articulating clear, objective criteria, so staff has what you need to evaluate the project. And they could be pretty stringent, like I think the intent is a gatekeeper has to go above and beyond, is what I've heard members of the council say over the years. So we should be asking for a lot, but what they're getting in return is the ability to have a discretionary legislative action process. And that's a big deal. That's a non-trivial thing for them. All I'm saying is let's de-risk that process to make it more attractive to the development community, and also have some very clear terms in articulating what it is that we're trying to achieve in that evaluation process. I talked too much, I'm sorry.
So I think the one area where I disagree with you is, I understand the criticism of the town piece, but I think what staff is proposing is kind of addresses that, where we're requiring something to be a minimum land use per acre. It has to be a significant project going forward. So I think the proposed streamline positions in the language makes sense. Address some of the concerns. I guess, I'm kind of going down. I was thinking before this along the lines of what the city manager said, where I think the gatekeeper process needs to be a little bit of a living document, because we're already dealing with the vision of the gatekeeper process 2 years ago is already outdated. So in my mind, one of the real benefits for me of gatekeepers is you get a sense for what the demand is, what the market conditions are, what sort of creative uses pencil at the moment. And I think that's really valuable, which is why I'm sure you'll hate me for suggesting this, but there was a point at which we were doing almost quarterly. And, being able to do a meeting every 6 months or so, if there are applications out there that meet some of the more stringent criteria, then I'd be open to that. That doesn't mean we approve every single one at the time, but once a year seems a little, I don't know, that just feels like a little off to me, but maybe there wouldn't be demand. I think but that would allow us, if we were just hearing, applications a couple times a year, if there are some, then we can sort of refine these principles over time and make them more stringent or less stringent as we see what comes in. I think the other point that you were making, some of the community design principles, we probably need to refine over time. You looked at active transportation, for example. If I were an applicant trying to get through the process, I could point to, wider sidewalks and some of the less valuable things to try and get through. But I think what in my mind would be above and beyond would be examples like, you're breaking up super block that we wanted to break up for a while. You're providing a new connection to the Stevens Creek Trail as part of a process, like we did with the hotel, which not yet, but someday. But those sorts of things where there's something that maybe the city has on its plans to do, and it would just get done is a significant. But I think those are all significant public benefits are all in the eye of the beholder. But I think historic preservation, like, just preserving a storefront is, not as attractive as something a little bit more substantial. So I think we'll just have to refine the criteria over time. But I think this is actually a pretty good start. I think if we were open to having, my colleagues might disagree with me, but if being open to have a couple of hearings a year as opposed to just one, and then sort of using that as an opportunity to refine this over time, I think would address some of the concerns. I think the issue I'm having is you made a lot of really good points, but I was also thinking through my head, I don't have specific proposals that I can cough up. Council addresses this. So I think we have to learn by doing, adjust it over time.
I think we're talking past each other a little bit. So I don't disagree with you, but I think it's important to be very explicit, right? The only way you avoid the gatekeeper authorization hearing and proceed to review is if you fall under any of these three categories, right? Most projects are not going to be 100% affordable. Most of them are not going to be split zone. There are very few split zoned properties owned by a single owner.
Right.
And then the remaining category is industrial to residential conversion, which is 100% of the exempted or streamlined gatekeepers now, but that's that's not really the performance indicator that the council's interested. I don't think we're saying we want to help facilitate the loss of our industrial base. I mean, there are diminishing properties every day as it is, right? So I think I don't disagree with the code amendments proposed. I disagree with the high level categories. I don't think I'm hearing you say that you would only support exempted or streamlined gatekeepers if they fall in these categories, right? Because I think if there was, so think about California near Ortega, the Todd Speaker property that was, there was a gatekeeper proposal at, at some point, many, 2015 or thereabouts, that also included 570 South Rangsdorf, I think that's where the road homes are being built. That couldn't meet any of these, right? But, if we had known then what we knew later, right? That the Rangsdorf property was going to be redeveloped regardless, maybe we would have said, allow for, let's at least have something dense, right? Because that area can sustain it. We want a park or something. That project couldn't fit in any of these criteria because it wasn't split zoned, it's not industrial, and it's not 100% affordable housing. I think what I'm hearing you say is, there may be other scenarios where not going to the authorization hearing is appropriate.
I'm working from a different baseline. There is no streamlined process today.
Yep,
So
there
it-
is.
Well, sorry, I guess. Has anyone applied through it?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, so
Oh,
Amra
right.
did with split zones, right, and we've had a few industrial, and then we've had, every NOFA project historically. Every NOFA project, I think, has required a general plan amendment or a rezoning.
Yeah.
That's why that exemption has existed, right? I want to expand the number of exemptions, basically. But I want to do so with the care put into what is it that we're trying to achieve. This becomes the basis for the exemption, not this. But right now, the way it's set up is you to have to be considered for to even be considered for submission to the application process, you have to do these things. These are very hard to do. Most developers they're not going to say, yeah, I'll provide 20% affordable housing for the privilege of going through the gatekeeper authorization hearing process where I can do all of these things and still get denied because the council members don't like me, right? That's what I'm objecting to. If you do these things, I think you should be processed. Can you help me? I'm struggling to articulate.
You go and then I have some.
Thanks. I think it would help maybe to start, are there projects other than residential projects that the committee wants to incentivize through the streamlined gatekeeper process? We really want to limit that to certain residential projects, either achieving density or affordability along the lines of what we proposed here, carving off the split zone, ITR. additional qualifiers?
I'm probably in the minority, but looking at the mid-year budget, I'm interested in more than just residential.
I agree.
I'm interested
We're on
in,
the same page.
maybe there's a residential component to it, like a few projects have, but it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it could do some of the things that I talked about, a new trail connection, breaking up Superwalk, all these things, and maybe it's office with ground floor retail, I don't know. But I think I'm interested in gatekeepers beyond just residential, but I could be there. I think I wasn't approaching it as how many people can we get through the streamline process. I was approaching it as, there's a subset that can go through streamline, but I really want to help refine the criteria that anyone would use for a gatekeeper, whether they're coming to us for authorization or they're going. I'm not really that interested in opening the floodgates for the streamline process. Because in the example that you provided, they could just come to us for an authorization if they meet the streamline criteria. If we have 1 or 2 meetings a year, we can do that. So I don't know, I just think proceeding through any gatekeeper process, whether it's the streamlined or the coming to council, there should be a high-ish bar to meet there.
So maybe one path to compromise, recognizing just some timing implications, and do we want another gatekeeper with current criteria, or do we want to try something different? And recognizing our housing element obligations, is there an approach to maybe just rework the streamlining provisions just for a category of higher density and affordable housing projects for now, and for this year's cycle? And through, the 1 or 2 or whatever number of authorization hearings over the next year, council will gain insight into the current market and that feedback loop of the living document. You may see 6 projects and say, these 3, for these reasons, shouldn't have come to us. They should have been streamlined, right? And then we come back and we tack those on as new streamlined categories, because that's responding to what the market's proposing, and the council at the time is saying, we think those should be encouraged.
When do we think the next gatekeeper hearing will be? Like end of year, mid-year?
I think
Maybe the beginning of
Doesn't
early
mean
26.
26 is
Yeah,
the-
early
the-
26,
okay,
yeah.
realistic.
Yeah, if we get to council and there's a decision before the break, I think early 2026.
We need to announce that the application period's now open on a rolling basis. We need to get them at least 90 days prior to the authorization hearing to provide a good ramp up for folks that weren't knowing when to expect it. Probably want to give them 3 or 4 months, which means we're in January, February, probably 2026.
Because I think we need to flesh it out. If this is like a one-time, let's update the gatekeeper process and then see how it goes for 3 years, then I think that's different from if we're making these tweaks now, addressing the housing element, having a hearing, and as part of the item that goes to council, it's sort of understood that they're authorizing the CPC to basically look at how that hearing went. Doing this again, within a year or so, because then it starts to turn into something more of a document where we're addressing it over time, as opposed to just updating it every 5 years or so.
Well, and I was gonna say too, it's almost as if we need to hear from council what your vision is for the type of projects you want to see. So like the examples you gave, the new projects that may create a new trail connection, office with ground floor retail, missing middle housing, condos, maybe family entertainment, things that might bring pickleball or youth sports here that they want to locate in an area that it's not zoned for that now. So you all might need to give approval for that. So maybe there are specific things, I mean, certainly housing, which the affordable housing piece would be important to keep, but maybe there are other types of projects that are non-residential that you all do want to see. And it's almost the signal to the developer community of, these are the type of projects that we would love to see or consider as as gatekeeper projects. And that can be iterative over time too, as the market shows
whether that's possible or not. If we don't get any applications in, then it's an indicator about what the market's gonna look like and we can change.
I think what I'm struggling to articulate is where the filter is applied really makes a difference though, right? If we're saying we're only going to consider at the authorization hearing projects that meet these criteria, we're gonna have no projects, right? Because even if I comply with all of these, I can still get denied. I could still be prohibited from even submitting an application. But there's a higher probability a developer will take the risk if they know that they can go straight to processing if they meet these objective criteria. So where are we applying the filter, right? If the filter is applied only to the standard gatekeeper process, then all we're doing is further restricting the universe of projects that will come to us for permission to submit an application, which is already a very small universe because it's an extremely difficult and risky and political process. So what I'm hoping to articulate is where we have still apply a robust filter, but the reward is if you jump through all these hoops, you get processed. Doesn't mean you get approved. You get to be processed. Like most developers will say, that's worth it. That's worth the opportunity. I know I got to do some things. I got to provide a park. I got to break up a super block, but I can do those things, right? And when I go work with staff for a couple of years, by the end of that, that tunnel, still have to get council approval, but I've got a project that I stand on two legs. But I think if we apply the filter for the standard gatekeeper process, we're going to end up year after year with no projects, or people just saying, you know what, I don't care about this. I'm just going to lobby, right? Like the public storage guy. Yeah, it's U-Haul, right? Like they complied with nothing, right? But they did a really good job lobbying for of us. And so we brought them to processing.
I hear you. I think you have to remember it's a menu. It's not you have to do all of these things. And I wish I'd thought more about this ahead of time of coming up with examples of things. It doesn't have to be a trail. It could be, I can't meet all of your existing criteria for this site for open space or whatever, but I'm gonna go buy this parcel in Mile Loma and
that's
convey
great.
it to you.
That's great. Yeah, I'd love that.
Yay. So there are things like that, but I think sometimes I agree with your predictions and sometimes I think we just need to see where things stand and maybe you're right, maybe we'll get nothing and maybe it will be a failure, in which case we can adjust things for next year. But I think there will there's also market conditions and other things at play, so I don't know. I'm not as pessimistic on. Some people might buy it. But maybe not, and if not, then
Depends on how long you're willing to wait, right?
well, I will do this again in January, February next year.
I mean, you've been on council before, right? But like we knew about U-Haul and Charleston Plaza much earlier than, the application submittal process, right? I'm hearing crickets,
But maybe that's not a function of this, maybe, I don't know, I can't assign. I'm not.
I don't think this
smart
makes it
enough.
better, though. I don't think this makes it better.
Well, at least there is. I mean, it's better than what exists today, I would say.
No, I think it's worse.
Oh.
Because we're applying another filter, right? We're
Only
saying
for the streamline process.
this is for the standard geek. This is how staff will evaluate standard geek,
Yeah, but it still come to us.
which means it's a waste of time because you could do all of these things and get denied, and you could do none of them and still get approved. It's not useful. It's not a useful exercise. I feel a little bit like Cassandra. Like I'm really struggling I am not the great communicator, like I feel so strongly like we're on parallel paths an inch apart, we can do it. I'm going to vote if we approve this, if we send it to council, because I am absolutely confident it will not achieve our goals. I think one more pass through with staff's assistance in identifying some, I wish I could use the term, some performance indicators or criteria that we can use to get results that are closer to what our goals actually are, and not just facilitating industrial to residential conversions or, you know, but like these are just not thoughtful criteria or categories, right, for streamlined gatekeepers, except for affordable housing. That one I get, right? Like, you know, literally split zone was because Mario Ambra tried a bunch of times and couldn't get through the gatekeeper process. So the council said, okay, fine, we're going to allow split zone properties, which applies almost uniquely to his property.
Well,
This is really not.
to be clear, he has a builder's remedy project.
Right,
so-
because so the council did that to help him, and he still
Yeah.
didn't get a project through, right? So like, all I'm saying is I would love this to be thoughtful. I would love it, I would love each, whatever categories we come up with. And I'm, just to be very clear, right, I'm generally agnostic about this. I'll support whatever the council wants. I'm trying to fix the process. I'm not necessarily gearing towards any particular outcome. All of these things are good, right? What I'm saying is if we care about these things, let's de-risk the process and create a process where you have a higher probability of actually getting these outcomes. This should form the basis for the streamlined gatekeeper categories.
So just deleting them, then.
Basically, like, so,
Changing it to this.
yeah, so instead of
So,
green, this
yes.
background would be blue.
Delete split zone, delete industrial or residential, keep affordable housing, if that at least furthers your affordable housing goals as council. Change these public benefits almost into the streamlined criteria.
Right.
And then that turns into required criteria in the outset. If we're thinking about the
Streamlined.
timing of the process, this comes at the beginning for streamlining. That's essentially what you're saying. And we delete these two categories that
That they're not
aren't
actually
gonna be
achieving the
helpful.
goals.
Correct.
Lindsay wants to say something.
Sorry, so just to clarify, another sort of quality about the current streamlined categories that we have is the 2 acre size. And a lot, that
Mhm.
history comes
Yeah.
from this idea of not sort of the scale of a project and having that be of a size that council at the time felt comfortable with it proceeding to staff and for processing. So one question I would have is just if, I guess if acreage or size matters in this context. So you can have performance criteria in terms of, you know, objective elements of your project that we're asking of you, but does acreage and other factors matter as
From my
well?
perspective, this is where staff's insight would be valuable, right? Like, we're balancing a couple of things. We're de-risking the process. We're providing clarity on what we want, but we still have to meter out the staff capacity impact, right? So I don't know what that number is, or if there should be a number, but I think if there are, I know, I appreciate what the city manager was saying earlier, it's not gonna be really easy, but if there are sort of overrides or parameters that we need to include, because if we simply streamline them, we're going to have a significant staff capacity impact, then we should know that upfront before we push things that way.
I think the important piece for me to make sure is recognized is that we still have the ability at the staff level to meter staff capacity. It just becomes a question of, you know, will council accept that? The city manager or I are saying, we don't have the capacity to work on these streamlined gatekeeper applications. There's no state law requiring us to process them in a given timeline. And so we incentivize the projects we want. We got 30 applications. We can't work on all 30. You know, we're making the judgment calls we have to make every day to run our organization to manage those projects most effectively.
I would, as much as I would love for there to be 30 applications, I'm anticipating that these are going to be quite robust, you know, and it's really going to be folks who have the capital and the patience and the political savvy to meet the hurdles. I don't think we're going to come in with the bar so low that you're going to have an enormous number of applications. This is going to be, knowing my colleagues, a very strict and difficult filter to get through.
And to be clear, it doesn't have to be, you don't need all of those.
Right.
No, I'm,
It's elements of.
I would say,
Yeah.
yeah, if the staff, you know, come back to us, I don't really care, right? These are all good. I don't know if these are the right categories or numbers. I trust staff and I trust my colleagues. I'm I'm going to die on a very specific hill. And that's making sure that we're creating we're bypassing that political risky process that does nothing for the city, right? But instead gives a pathway for projects that I think achieve council and community.
I mean, to be clear, as was stated earlier, most cities don't even have that. So I think anything is better than nothing, but that's just where I'm at. So putting on my kind of hat, we have two members of the CPPC. One of them votes no, then we have no recommendation to council, and we basically turn what could have been a consent item into a whole study session or whatever. So I'm trying to figure out if there is a path forward or if this is going to end with a recommendation. So is there?
It wouldn't even go as a study session. We would just continue with the process the way it is.
Right.
now.
But you're gonna, if they don't get feedback from us, then you're gonna have council feedback on what to do. And we have a housing element deadline. So I'm trying to figure out if there's some way to meet the housing element deadline without doing anything you don't want to do, or if we just need to get this up to council.
If I may, Chair, Councilmember Ramirez, before answering that question, because I don't know what the answer is gonna be. Can we turn to page 3 of the draft policy and see if there's any coalescing around certain of these that would become a basis for, one or more or two or more of the following, in order to be a premium to the application.
Wired.
These would depend on required components to be streamlined, and otherwise these could remain informative for non-streamlined applications, but one could propose whatever they want, with or without any of these as part of the regular gatekeeper.
So my compromise would be, if I get what I want, then Chris gets to write all of this by himself, and I will vote yes. Because
On the spot in this meeting.
I'm okay with this, right? Like I'm because I agree it should be a living document. I don't think we need to be super prescriptive. I think these generally align with what I think the council has been seeking for as long as I've been on the council, right? Affordable housing, keeping small businesses, creating more open space and recreational facilities, or I love the branch library idea. These all sound good. I'm not trying to be prescriptive here. I trust your judgment, right? Some of these numbers are hard, right? 20% affordable housing may mean that we don't get any gatekeepers at all, because that's a very difficult number to make financially feasible. But like as high level categories, I'm comfortable with them, and I trust the judgment of staff and my colleagues to figure out what the right numbers are.
So starting with 1, is there a concern about this spot zoning issue? Do we need number 1, as a gatekeeper, streamlined gatekeeper? Qualifying criteria?
I don't.
I don't.
I think we can delete that.
That was a specific concern. I remember that concern, but I don't think it's.
The other thing I would offer as you're thinking is you could just turn these into the requirements. We can take the feedback that you all have given us about some of the themes of the desired projects. And we can say to council, we're gonna try this for just this next cycle through January. Let's see what happens. Let's see between now and then what type of projects we get. And we come back to CPPC after we see what has happened. And then if this works, great. Or if it doesn't, we'll see what we do need to change and tweak. And maybe we say, all right, we were too prescriptive. There were, too many things. We need to take out some of these requirements, even though they're options. Or maybe the sort of projects that you do see, they meet one of the desired projects, but the project itself just isn't that great. So I feel like we need to just kind of see what happens over the next 6 months. We can make these tweaks, but I'd rather not cut off our nose to spite our face to where we're trying to make progress, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So if we turn these into requirements, we, like I said, take the themes that we're hearing from you all. Staff can tighten some of these up. And then we say to council, this is just gonna be phasing. Let's see if this phase of changes works. I mean, that's also an option, so that it's
Or streamlined gate.
correct.
Right.
Correct.
I think another thing that I would look for is, I think I wish I had a whole list, but, you know, for example, and I realize this isn't, you don't have to do all of these requirements, but, you know, if you were just trying to meet the active transportation requirement, there's low hanging fruit and then
Right.
there's something substantial
Right.
and hopefully it would
Right.
lean towards substantial.
Yes. And that's a little bit where the non-objective piece comes in, because kind of determining then what is substantial and what isn't is a little bit of nuance for staff.
Because A, B, and C are substantial just
They
on
are.
their own.
They are.
But if you're just supporting one ground floor tenant through rent stabilization for a
Right.
5-year period, then that's really not as attractive as what's bigger.
A couple pieces here from the staff practitioner perspective. Just opening this to any size of project at the outset is a little concerning. Difficult to not have major staff resource impacts if a 5 or 10 acre project site came in. I think keeping something in the 2 to 3 acre range to put a little bit of a ceiling on it as we're exploring the reaction to this mechanism would be really desirable from a staff perspective. And then working through, some of these aren't objective enough, I think, to allow staff to not bear the political burden of assessing whether they're streamlined, qualified or not. So recognizing we're gonna iterate in the future, but maybe focusing on a half acre or 3/4 acre park size, that's objective. Having these certain affordable housing, affordability levels is objective. 30,000 square foot TDR or a community facility, is objective.
We could also tie it to criteria that aligns with the council work plan that's adopted. So if it's a project that furthers a council work plan project, so for example, Stevens Creek Trail, if it's something that builds onto what we're trying to do with Stevens Creek Trail, or any of the number of things, however many there ends up being, if it's something that helps further one of your high priority work plan projects, maybe that's something we can add to.
That might address one of the concerns that I had is some of the most interesting gatekeepers to me over time have been these two property owners have partnered up. It's actually a massive thing. It's not 1
Yeah.
or 2 acres. It's
Yeah.
real, like once in a generation type change.
Mhm.
And so maybe there's some other mechanism besides gatekeeper for someone to approach the city because it meets a whole bunch of different goals. But I still want to, we're not in a market where that's gonna happen now, but those were some of the most interesting ones I saw in the past.
I think the good news is that this would allow the city manager to schedule a gatekeeper, right? Currently, it's this
Yeah.
this epic process, right? Like, oh, it's once in a, year or every several year or, once a decade opportunity. But the city manager recognizes this is one of those unique opportunities. We get an application, hold a hearing in 90 days or 120 days or whatever. Depending on
And
the
you'll
scope
know
of the
about it.
analysis.
Council members will know about it because you'll have been approached and will have been
Right.
approached, and it'll be something that I will know and you all will know that should be brought forward. One that I can think of is the public storage item, to redo theirs and do affordable housing.
Right.
That was a super unique gatekeeper project that we didn't really see. So I think it's like when you see, when you know it when you see it. So maybe that's kind of a way to get through this situation we're in, where we can tighten these up. We will reflect what we're hearing about the interest for the type of projects. We can even address the fact that it would be great if they align with the work plan or the goals that you all have articulated or you'll eventually adopt. I almost like the phrasing, the once in a generation, or, once every few decades, just the certain transformative sort of projects for the community, for the vision of tomorrow. So I think we could put something together if you all are comfortable, and maybe if you all think that we could come back at the end of March and you're still not totally sidelined. Or what about think the beginning of like April might be hard just because we have the retreat and council meeting and there's a lot going
Yeah.
on, but
And spring break.
Yes.
I'm off. certainly
Yeah.
first week of April.
yeah. Unless you all feel comfortable with us tightening it up.
I do think though, we need to add a lot of objectivity to some of this, you know, and so I worry that we are then overstep, like my staff really has to have very clear
Yeah.
standards.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would want that too.
Yeah.
So I think I proposed earlier, maybe just indicating some of these that are maybe of greatest interest that would form the required menu for the streamlined gatekeeper. Maybe focusing on those that already have some inherent objectivity to them as part of this, version 1.0 that we're trying to create. Number two, on page 3, we have to have that. Maybe support that.
Business retention.
Sorry.
Business retention's
the
not,
affordable housing application
Yeah.
criteria.
business retention is not objective at
Numbers
all.
different.
Oh, 2A.
2A,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
sorry, forgive me.
We looked at the wrong page, but yeah, the ones with the most objectives are affordable housing and public open space community facilities. Those are all increased. I think where it gets nebulous is
Yeah,
retention,
that would be
information, and
very
historic
difficult.
preservation.
I think that wouldn't make the cut in this first version of this. It's just hard to define objectively without significant.
Not that we can't include those as like ideas, but
I think these remain as guidelines
Yeah,
that shape a
preferences.
non-streamlined
Yeah.
project, right? Where they can define.
On community facilities, though, we need to add things like sizes and, because otherwise someone's gonna propose something ridiculous. I've actually seen,
yeah, I mean,
size of the facility and types, because sometimes you sometimes see it, like, see it and want
Right.
the use, right? So we have to make sure our other departments want the facility as well, because then they become the programmer. So I've seen kind of that fail a little bit in this process.
Yeah, it's funny, 2D is the one where I would actually be fairly comfortable with being deferential to staff, right? So subject to the concurrence of the city manager, right? If the city manager says, we need that facility, I'm cool with that being a streamlined gatekeeper request, like that, if it's a city facility, right? The city staff are in the best position to tell the council what you want. That one I don't think needs to be as robustly, well, I mean, I trust your judgment on this, or, an Olympic size, public swimming pool or something, right? Like that would be something that I think would be hard to turn down. The other ones, and again, I'm not terribly prescriptive here, right? I could quibble with numbers and categories, but I'm putting all of my political capital into one very specific change.
I think we can work with the public open space component. I think, maybe a 3/4 acre minimum and then percentage of site area. Above that, just to make sure something is portioned to the project. And then on the community design principles, there's 75% native trees and landscaping that could be required to some of their landscaping plan. Not involving demolition of a historic resource might be the version of B that's objective.
Yeah.
probably a good thing.
Yeah. It's essentially taking these and just turning them around.
Yeah, I'm trying to make them objective.
Your goal is to make these go away.
I don't
Except for
think,
this.
right, so that's like a categorical, yeah, that we should exempt that, but I don't think these actually achieve any goals that the council actually has, right? So it would be, this exists, but the categories are different. The categories would be.
All of these things we're talking about.
Right. And for the streamlined criteria, is there a, and does not component, and does not convert resident or industrial land area, or for the streamlined criteria, it should still be a regular gatekeeper.
I actually feel strongly about that.
You do or don't?
I don't.
I
But
don't
we have
either.
had interest converting industrial sites
There has
into
been.
potential recreation. So we should be careful about that.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it.
Yeah.
I don't.
I don't want to be prescriptive. It's more what we're trying to, if the council decides.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
But we, at the, that's,
Yeah.
that, we always, at the end of the day, we've got
Yeah.
CEQA, right? And then we always have the ability to deny
Mhm.
just a general plan amendment. But yeah, I think it's more like these may not be all of our goals, right? I think as a starting point, as the chair had referenced, it's pretty strong, right? There might be other things that the council's interested in. But I think this is more like, what are we trying to achieve with a gatekeeper? That's what I'm hoping the council will articulate through the policy.
So if we align on that, does it still need to come back to?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think we're clear now.
Probably can't get away with a consent item.
Probably not.
We'll have to.
You never know. We may be able to work some magic.
One can always pull it.
We do.
One other piece, just if we're to think about 2A, right, as a requirement, for a project proposing residential use, you have these affordability levels. Is there anything from the reworked exemptions that we presented that's relevant, like, if it's a residential project that has these affordability levels and it's at least 30 units per acre, or it's adjacent to a site that's already designated for higher residential development density? So we're encouraging, the expansion of higher density residential next to higher density residential through the streamlined gatekeeper.
I think the proposed project density of at least 30 units per acre is actually important. It's not merely that you're providing, a lot of affordable housing. If those are all single family homes, it's not really achieving like arena obligation. So I do like that as a parameter for residential projects. It would, but then again, there may be, so the chair's point, I don't want to be too prescriptive because there may be a scenario where someone submits a project that has great merit and requires a lower density because it's in Waverly Park or something, where I don't know.
You highlighted such an example. We discussed. So
I think though, just to make sure, but then a streamlined project could look like somebody submitting 30 dwelling units an acre on a site that's immediately surrounded by R1, all R1. If you don't also include the 12 dwelling unit an acre component. So I just want to make sure that's clear, and then that would be streamlined. And not that you can't disapprove it in the end, it's
Right.
just, I'm not sure if that's the type of project we're trying to get to.
That's a good point.
I don't have a philosophical objection to developing pretty intensely next to R1. R1 isn't special to me, but I know. Again, this is just the privilege of having an application reviewed.
I think the point that's being made is you have an application like that where it's gonna get all of the arms, has the right to lead all the way to the end. And there's a year of kicking and screaming, only to get to more kicking and screaming and where it's.
We have the study sessions though, right? And at any time, the council can say, we actually don't want to continue processing. That's my understanding. We always retain the right to say, you know what?
You're
this
just
is-
wasting a bunch of time leading up to that because something that's ultimately going to.
Yeah, and also expense, because to get someone to a completed application and into the realm where we would even take them to the study session, that's quite a distance to go. I think it's just important to think about those factors.
So recognizing this is expected to be iterative, is there a more limited approach to this first version that is tied to adjacent higher density residential in this first iteration? And if the sky didn't fall, or we figured out like we like a checkpoint with the study sessions, if it's working for us, the council could decide to lift that, right? And perhaps open up more opportunities in the future.
I feel like an annual review of the policy is probably. Right. I mean, my hypothesis is, given the market and given that we're likely to impose very strict criteria, there won't be any streamlined gatekeepers for my time on council. But every year the council can take a look and say, this is not working. Maybe we need to bring 20% affordable down to 15%. So
Why don't we just have the committee do, they can kick things up to council.
that's fine too. I'm okay with that. The periodic review is the important thing and not necessarily getting right first time, because we're not.
Yeah, that's what I said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is the first time we've ever even brought this to CPBC to create such a policy.
Right.
So we can try and see what works, see what doesn't, come back. I think it's a great idea to just have the committee review it annually. Then maybe once we're kind of used to this and we get to a cadence, and he's like, we're fine with this, we don't need to review it annually, but until then, I think it's a nice little nuance there. And I think it's a way to get through. But
Do we want to summarize something we can both live with?
Do we trust staff to do it or do we trust
let's
ourselves?
summarize it, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
So what we have, building off of the draft policy prepared by staff in attachment 1, is keeping the content that's in the draft policy, shifting the suggested application criteria to be required application criteria for streamlined gatekeepers, and limiting them to a 2-acre parcel size. If they're residential projects, proposing at least 30 dwelling units per acre, including the affordability criteria in 2.A, requiring public open space of a 1/2 acre to a 3/4 of an acre, or a percentage of the site, whichever is greater. We need to work on that a little bit, thinking about what makes sense, but providing a community facility, community use that's been identified as a city need, subject to the city manager's concurrence, or participating in a city-approved TDR at 30,000 square feet or more. And then I think also including from the community design principle, the trees and biodiversity, objective criteria, no demolition of a historic resource, and achieving net zero carbon emission in building and site design.
I mean, that there will be few projects that will achieve all of those, but starting, the council has the opportunity to say whether they want to be more strict or more progressive.
Jennifer was also kind of about council work plan projects and the board's manager know.
Yeah, I think we can hold that in that.
Great.
Piece of it.
Great.
Oh. I think when we have our first hearing, we review it, we can decide if we want to have 2 or not. I'm okay with what we decide, but you don't.
I think, if I'm understanding it correctly, then
So
it's a compromise I can live with.
that list becomes the codified exemptions that are in the municipal code, the city code currently for rezonings and general plan amendments. And then we delete the versions of the gatekeeper exemptions that are here. And then for regular gatekeepers, we essentially keep the full menu of suggested criteria that are not required.
Right. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
so that's still a
decide.
political
Yeah.
process.
I move that we approve that recommendation.
Second. Look at this, democracy is still alive.
Okay. Chair Clark
Aye.
and Councilmember Renz.
Yes.
That motion. Chair McAllister is absent, and that carries 2-0. We've been talking about
Consent
Oh,
versus
we're gonna skip
non-consent.
that. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
This is my senior council member.
Thank you very much.
Lost all my seniority.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So 5.2 is virtual public participation in meetings of legislative bodies and members. That is item when you're ready.
I actually don't have a presentation. This is
Agreed.
something that you referred to council, so
It's my fault.
it's, yes,
I'm
it's
glad you did, because I have opinions on this.
however you'd like to lead.
A short minute.
It's up to you, Chair. I'm happy to share some of the rationale.
I missed some of the debate last year.
And what happened too,
Yeah.
what prompted it?
So I'm pretty sure this came up after the Zoom bombing.
Yes.
And there were a couple of, the staff report, I think, articulates all of the things that had come up, but just to reiterate them. Having clear and consistent procedures that apply universally written down is always a nice thing. That's why we're on CPPC. But also giving the chair or the city manager or the IT director some discretion to act swiftly in the event there is, an attack like that or some other need to deviate from from a conventional public participation or virtual medium element, right? Just having a procedure written down so we can respond in real time. And then we also talked about other ways of mitigating those impacts. I think given what happened last November, I think we could probably anticipate future attacks. So do we decouple public comments so you have in-person public comment early and then virtual public comment at the end of the meeting? Some jurisdictions have done that. So it's more an opportunity to codify some rules and regulations so everyone's on the same page. Now that we have an environment where we're finding some people are misusing the technology.
Although I think it's, I think the majority of the issues would likely be through Zoom, but I think there are also some issues that I've seen at other. So I guess the question was, so I think we're allowed, and we do at some of these meetings already, like the ceremonial meeting where if it's a special meeting, we don't have to allow oral communications from the public on non-agenda items. I think that should just be a policy. Like if it's a special meeting, there's no oral communications from the public in person on Zoom. Full stop. Just regular meeting, obviously, we'll go through the normal. The question I had, and maybe it's for the city attorney's office, but is do we have to allow virtual comment on non-agenda items, or can we limit that to just in-person speakers, that specific?
On item 5. I think it's a little tricky to say for one specific item, we're not gonna allow virtual speakers, but you're gonna allow it on items on the agenda. I think that, I don't know that there's really a law against it, with the exception of if you have council members attending virtually, then you have to let people comment virtually, right? So it's the only legal parameter that requires for public comment at any level. You don't actually have to allow virtual public comment at all.
That's where I was. So I'm probably in the minority here, but if it were me, I would just say, we'll still broadcast our meetings, all those things, but if you want to comment on an item, you either need to be at the council in person, or you always have the ability to submit something through email, or you could submit a voice note in advance and we could play the meeting. I don't know, but there's a part of me that would just eliminate the virtual component of public comment, because there are other avenues, either in person or just submitting the comments in advance, unless there's a council member participating. But I realize. But I do think at a minimum, if we don't already, we should just eliminate public comment on non-agenda items for any meeting that isn't a regular meeting. And then if we have the ability to only have in-person public comment on non-agenda items, then I think but what we haven't addressed is the policies and procedures for what we do if someone goes off the rails in person. But fixing this in San Jose and elsewhere, have them.
Do you remember whether the Zoom moment happened during item 5, or was it on? I thought it
It
was
was-
also on an item.
It was on item, it was on a
Yeah.
couple items,
Yeah.
and so what you read at the beginning of this meeting came from what
Right.
happened there, where it was like, no, we warned them during the meeting. We were Zoom bombed, people said some pretty vile things, and we said, and we could tell in the queue there were people with like fake names
Yeah.
in there.
Was
And
bad.
so we said, if you are going to speak on items that aren't pertinent to the agenda or they're disruptive to the meeting, we will cut you off. And that's exactly what we did. But it was during the items and it was virtual. This, to your point though, you know, there have been many cities that have seen folks show up in person, especially now that are agitating like we've seen virtually. So we would probably do the same thing, but it would be harder because it's easier just to mute someone and
Yeah, I
kick
mean, you
them
can
out.
turn off their mic pretty easily, but they're
Yes,
still.
they're
going to
still
make
in the
that scene,
chambers.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
And there's really not that much.
Other than, you know, we have folks present in the meeting that would help with a situation like that, but you're right.
And we've already got language in our policies about how we resolve the situation if it was in
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I don't know, I've been in this weird simplify everything mode for the last 6 months. And, yeah, when you read that paragraph. at the
Yeah.
beginning of
It
every
was a
single
lot.
committee meeting, like, to me is.
It's a lot.
Can we just not do virtual comment? Like, just submit in writing what you want to do, submit a voice note that there isn't laced with profanity in advance. And just, your people can still watch the meeting live, but we de-risk a lot of that. And I realize there's a huge cost to that because most people are, I won't name names, but most people, you know, act in good faith and provide really valuable comments remotely. But a lot of those people who provide really insightful comments also submit a letter to the council where they speak and they just reiterate their. So in my mind, it isn't a huge trade, but I realize to others, that's a really big. That would be a big change.
And I did ask the clerk, we brought this up to CPPC last year about eliminating virtual public comment. That was staff's recommendation or an option.
How come I don't remember that?
It wasn't
it was-
CPVC, it was
oh,
something that
was-
we had conversations with council about and then talked about at a meeting.
Oh, that's
And
what it
kind
was.
of everyone
Said,
the majority was not
Yes.
in favor of
Yeah.
removing virtual.
I don't know what the majority would do now, but I do remember that. I think, you know, we could allow virtual, you know, if someone has a presentation or someone is, you know, invited to speak. You know, an applicant needs to do a remote presentation, like that's one thing, but I think. Unless the city attorney's office said we don't actually have to read this anymore before every meeting, but not that that's the only thing. I don't know. It needs to now be in a world where you can comment on anything virtually and. complicates. That's just me. More senile. But I want to address whatever specifically this was meant, what we were.
I mean, I think your conclusion was one I had come to as well. I think just sort of saying it out loud, part of the challenge is, you know, it's unpleasant to sit in a meeting where people are saying those things. But it's much, much worse if it's directed at you, you know, and I think that's something that some folks don't have a full appreciation for. And I was pretty close to it in San Jose. My prior boss was the one who actually ended up moving to eliminate virtual public comment entirely because he was just tired of it. Like when you're sitting there being subject to it for like 15 minutes or 20 minutes.
what did the council do there?
The council eliminated virtual
Okay.
participation from every meeting.
Well,
Yeah,
okay,
so just hard stop. And we still get tons and tons of emails saying bring back virtual
Yeah.
participation. But San Jose was targeted just in such a sustained way, right? Where like you just can't function right after having that kind of vitriol directed at you. You know, and I think if you're like, again, it's unpleasant if it's not directed at you, but you can kind of like move past it and get back to business. So I think that's a subtlety that, you know, I think not everyone may appreciate. But it's why I tend to agree with you, right? Like I would rather create an environment where everyone feels welcome and free to participate than have an environment where, I mean, it's a good thing that a lot of people have participated virtually and generally, you know, we haven't had a problem, right? I think it does open up opportunities to participate, but your point is well taken, right? You can come to a meeting, you can reach out, we're pretty accessible as the council. I think most of us check our emails regularly.
Stop.
Yeah. So it's not like you were denied an avenue to participate. Just it, you know, it helps create a more welcoming and inclusive environment where you don't have to come in thinking, oh man, do I have to, you know, endure some really challenging hateful
And,
comments?
you know, there were debates where people showed up in person and screamed at me directly, and that's okay. I mean, it wasn't fun, but I'm gonna make the effort and feel a strong way about my position on something, and that's okay. But
Well, and not even just like, I mean, I know you're not saying this, but like, you know, it's not, in most cases, it's not because of the position of you're taking, it's because of who you are, right? And that's where, like, that's why we're having this discussion at the end of the day. I think it's like, how do you make sure that you're not inviting vitriol and hatred into a space where some people are just.
it's just easier to say things you wouldn't normally say virtually
Yes.
than it is.
You can make up a
looking at
name
someone in the
too.
eye. Yeah,
It's,
and most of them are on video, right?
Yeah.
Deliberately.
Yes.
Which is fine, but I don't know, I'm just of the. Especially since we're doing this with every single committee meeting.
Well, part of this is the good governance,
Yeah.
good governance cap. It's like, whatever we do, there should be a policy that applies universally,
Right.
right? If we allow virtual participation, then we should allow it everywhere. It shouldn't just be like this ad hoc kind of thing.
That's why it feels a little weird to, we're not gonna do virtual comment for oral communications, but we'll do it for everything else. I feel like it just.
Well, the thing, since disproportionately it tends to be non-agenda public comment, where people say
Right.
hateful things, and that's where it's harder to turn them off. You know, one idea was put that at the end of a meeting, so make them wait until 2 o'clock in the morning to spout their hatred, right? Most folks aren't. And it's rare for non-agenda public comment to have dramatic impact on the council meeting that people are speaking in, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
that was one sort of.
I'd be fine with moving it, but I just. Create some.
We could afford so I'm interested in exploring that. I don't think it's gonna get majority support from the council, but I think
you never know.
maybe.
I mean, so if that's what I'm hearing, that the majority of the committee is interested in exploring, not allowing it, I mean, we can float it to council or maybe talk about it at your retreat.
Yeah, I mean, it
That's
could be a
another
menu of
thing.
things. Yeah, we could do it at the retreat before we
Yeah,
get the public all
Yeah,
spun up about it,
yeah.
public. But, because I'm not sure there's majority support, but maybe if we explore it at the retreat, there could be a menu of options too. Like, I don't mind moving oral communications to the end. Like, maybe
Holistically or just virtual?
all of it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we can just do that.
Yeah.
The
The
mayor
order
can,
of
the
the
mayor can
agenda.
just do that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
We
you
can
can
talk to the
always
mayor and we've already swapped the closed session report out to be after closed session. It used to be at the end of the agenda. So we moved that up so we could talk to the mayor about moving that at the end.
Things we might think about, things there might be 4 votes for, like that might be one. We don't eliminate virtual public comment at council meetings. Maybe we don't need it for committee meetings. There, you know, maybe we can just submit. I think, I don't know. There's a whole
So you,
different permutations of it.
well, you all will be talking about different communication norms and things like that at the retreat, so we could float this at the retreat.
And I can bring it up to there.
Yeah.
But is there anything specific we want to do today here, or do we want to just agree to bring it up? to the retreat?
Yeah, I would see, let's see what, if I may, let's see what comes out of the retreat. And then we can kind of tailor whatever needs to change based on that. Whether it's holistic to all of the bodies or just council, or if it's a pilot for a while and then kind of modify as a policy, but then maybe we can see what comes out of it.
Yeah, and based on how they feel about certain things we bring up, then they could always just refer it back to us. And then we take another stab at it.
Yeah, this was really just to kind of give you the forum to have a discussion about it.
I'm comfortable with that.
Public comment, is there any public comment on this item?
Yes.
Oh, there is.
We have Bruce England.
Hi. Yeah, Bruce England, Wisman Station Drive. So I'm probably one person who takes a great advantage of the virtual commenting at a variety of meetings, not just city council meetings, but a lot of people body meetings too. So I'm very familiar with that process. I also know that the number of people who have made negative comments and have been disruptive, it's been really rare. There haven't been that many cases of it. And as was pointed out, when it happened, they were just cut off, and that's the appropriate way to handle it. But the optics of compromising the public commenting in this way is just really poor. And you might not realize how many people out in the community are actually participating in discussions that lead up to the public commenting. And sometimes they're simply not available until the agenda item comes up because everybody has lives, right? We're all doing the things we need to do that are important and pressing right at the moment. We're not necessarily prepared to write a letter, have it reviewed by multiple people and that whole process. And given that the staff reports and the packets don't come out until a few days before the meeting, makes it even more challenging to pull together a comment letter that can represent a group of people. So having as many options as possible is essential. And I also want to point out that the virtual public commenting is also important for people who just can't get to the city hall, for they have disabilities or young kids or anything like that. I think going down a route of restricting any public participation in any way is going down the wrong path. And I urge you to not entertain the idea. If you want to discuss it at the retreat, sounds like you're discussing doing that. That might be appropriate, but I do urge you to not go down any path that leads to any sort of restrictions on what we have right now. Thank you.
Good points. Thank you, Ruth.
Next, we have Silja Paymer.
Hi, I'm Celia Paymer, and I agree with Bruce. For instance, this meeting, I was like, oh, I don't know if it's too many things that are coming up. And I was able to get a text from someone who's like, there's something important going on. And I could jump right in and hear about it and hear it live. Whereas I wouldn't be able to get to City Hall because I'm driving my kid to swim team practice right now and are about to jump in the car. And I've had times in the evenings where it's, the transportation committee and I'm listening to it while reading books to my kids, and I'm able to go over and give input on routes that my kids are going to take to bike to school in high school. So it's part of including equitable voices. I don't think you will get as much input from parents, from people who are working, from people who might have disabilities, from people who might have transportation issues. There's a whole host of reasons why it's super important to allow virtual commenting in order to include our citizens' voices in our democratic process and representation. So I think we would be really moving away from a lot of our, I would think, city principles of inclusion if we remove public comment times through the virtual meetings. Thank you. And that's even for committee meetings. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next, we have Emily Abraham.
Yep. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree with what Celia and Bruce mentioned, that I think virtual commenting has opened up just a ton of possibilities for me. Like it used to be so difficult to attend meetings and even like listening in, because if I can't make public comment, there's very little reason to just listen in, right? I'm not allowed to give input, but virtual comments has opened up, where I can multitask. I can be at home, and if I don't have time to attend the meeting, then I can attend the meeting and make my voice heard. But I do try to attend the in-person meetings as much as I can, but I have a job, I have activities after work, and I'd love to continue to be able to attend virtually whenever I can. But yeah, if there are hateful comments coming on, then I think the appropriate action is to mute them, kick them out of the call. We should really only be allowing for relevant public comment. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Proposed comment, it sounds like we're not gonna take any action on this item now. Could be something that we bring up at the retreat. So 5.3, council policy procedures, agenda topics update. Deputy City Manager, do you have any?
Just briefly, Chair, the CPPC holds approximately 2 meetings per year. And for this fiscal year, you are through this meeting completing your items that were on your action plan. With today's action, the gatekeeper, I also heard, would be potentially an ongoing annual update item. And then there may be some additional follow-up associated with virtual, but we'll see what transpires for the retreat. But as of this time, you are completed on your work plan for this fiscal year, and then we'll see what the development occurs for the new fiscal year. And that concludes staff's brief report.
And then if there are items that come up throughout the year, someone could bring it up as an item 8 to council meeting to refer.
And then we incorporate it into the work plan.
But they probably want to do that before the work plans are out.
The CPPC doesn't do a advisory body work plan.
Right.
It's iterative, so
Okay.
we can continue to add items as needed.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Item 6, committee staff comments, questions, committee reports.
I think I'm, okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't have anything, so that completes all the items on our agenda, so we'll adjourn at 4:31 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks, all of you.
That was a good.